Hi, everybody. Those of you who have joined us at this point, we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. First of all, let you know that my name is Lisa Pawnee. I'm the Director of Development and Donor Relations at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, and it's my pleasure to be your MC for today's presentation on Maud Lewis. I might add, too, that as a Nova Scotian, I've been particularly happy to see Maud getting her due. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. I'm just going to say a few more things about the McMichael before we get started. For those of you who have been there, it is a beautiful place. And for those of you who haven't been there, rather, you would not know this, but it is an absolutely gorgeous place, set in the woods, north of Toronto. Magical is, I think, the word that most people use to describe it. And it has an incredible collection of a group of 7, but also many other Canadian artists. And of course, Sarah Milroy, who's our chief curator, who'll be speaking today, has much more to say about the McMichael and what a fantastic place it is. If you're within range of the McMichael, we'd love you to come and visit. We are open now. We're open from Thursdays to Sundays, and we've got social distancing. We've got mandatory mask wearing. We're letting people in on timed entry. So if it's very safe right now, and it's an opportunity to come and see a couple of special exhibitions as well as a huge collection of Group of 7 that's up right now. So I'm going to begin with the Land Acknowledgement. Officially, McMichael Canadian Art Collection is located on the original lands of the Ojibwe Anishinaabe people. It is uniquely situated along the Carrying Place Trail, which historically provided an integral connection for Aboriginal people between Ontario's Lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region. As an institution, the McMichael recognizes the importance of acknowledging the original territories of the Ojibwe Anishinaabe First Nations people. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I just want to let you know that participants are muted, but if you have a question, you can submit it in the Q&A. You will see there's a Q&A button, and you can just type a question in there. I will monitor those during Sarah's presentation, and we're going to do our best to get to them following the extraordinary performance by Sarah Slean. Also afterwards, there'll be an opportunity to support the McMichael. If you're familiar with QR codes, it's very simple. There will be a QR code on the screen. You just hold your phone up to it with your camera on, and it will take you to a website where you can donate, or you can go to the McMichael website itself. And we hope that you'll be able to consider a donation to support this and future presentations. So I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Milroy. She's the chief curator of the McMichael and the mastermind behind this exhibition. While it's no longer at the McMichael, it'll be touring across Canada, so hopefully you'll catch it wherever you are. And now on to Sarah's presentation.
Hey there, everyone. Can you see me? Is this all working, Lisa?
It is.
Lisa's been tying my mittens on today because I am most uneasy about technology, but willing to come out of my bat cave for Maud Lewis, because we're so thrilled to have been able to present her work once again in Ontario. It was a huge hit. We now call it the Maud Effect. And we're now going to be very lucky to send this show across Canada. It's now heading off to Thunder Bay next. We're just finishing the packing crates now. After Thunder Bay, it heads to Winnipeg, to the Winnipeg Art Gallery, then to the Glenbow in Calgary. We have a few more destinations in Western Canada that are just getting ready to sign on the line with us now. And then it'll be heading home, of course, to Nova Scotia, which is, of course, Maud Lewis's heartland, and doing the final victory lap there. So we want to do that there because the show, of course, came out of Nova Scotia Collections, the leading collection of John Risley. Everyone, if you haven't gone out and bought lobsters, should do so right away to thank John for this beautiful show. And Alan Deacon, who is another leading collector of Maud Lewis. We came to know of their collections. They together own more than 300 works by Maud Lewis and have the consummate collections of the artist's work. So while there is a lot of repetition in Maud Lewis's output, as many of you will know, they have the creme de la creme. So we were very, very lucky to be able to develop the show, so quickly at such a high level, and to be able to make the publication, which reproduces all of the works that we had in the show in full color, in short order for this project, which is, as I say, now outward bound. So thank you to our friends in Nova Scotia that made this possible, and to the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia that has kind of burnished the legend of Maud all these years. But the Maud Effect began a long time ago I'll just start here with going to my, oh, wait a minute. Start screen share and now am I on full view there?
We've still got you, Sarah, so we just need to share your screen. If the green button to share your screen.
Bear with me.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Oh!
I'm getting a very clear message back from my computer.
Carmela needs to give you control. She's
Okay,
in the
go
back.
ahead.
No, she said, no, you can do it now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Here we
go
go.
ahead and share your screen now.
Prepare for a blaze of color. Is everyone sitting down? Here we go. Now you've got this, and here we are in Maud world. How is that looking?
Hooray. There
Hooray.
it is.
All right. So we thought we would start with this wonderful object. I would say painting. It is a painting, of course, but it's an object too. It's the sign that Maud Lewis had outside her little tiny house on the highway, in a little strip of highway called Marshalltown, just to the west of Digby, Nova Scotia. And this is how she marketed herself. It was very lo-fi, as we now say. It was a sign by the road, sometimes leaning on the house, sometimes leaning on a chair outside by the road. And tourists would drive by in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they would see this beautiful little sign and pull over. And that really is how she and her husband, Everett Lewis, who was kind of the salesman in the family, this is how they would sell her work, and it worked just fine. They sold work constantly through the tourist season to both people in the community in Nova Scotia, but also to visiting tourists from other parts of Canada and the US, which is why her work is actually quite widely scattered. We're only learning more about that now. But the reason I wanted to start with this is how she wanted to present herself. And you know, I think that there's so many things about this sign, actually, before we even get into the paintings, that tell us about Maud Lewis, her incredibly adept way with contrasting colors, making things vibrate with those reds and blues, the kind of extraordinary jauntiness of this. I don't know if you can see my arrow moving back and forth, but this kind of zoomy N here that seems to mimic the movement of the cars that would have been rushing past your house and bring them to a halt. This S, the comma that seems to dance here, this lovely little embellishment in the O. There's really nothing in this sign, which is after all just a utilitarian object really, that doesn't show her incredible intuition for composition and color and form, and that really trademark liveliness and darlingness about the way that she creates visual images. It's when we saw this painting, we knew this had to be the cover of our book. It just sort of says it all. And it also goes straight on, head on into the issue of the fact that she was making paintings for sale, which some people have occasionally in the past impugned her for, you know, cranking paintings out for an audience. The fact of the matter is that, of course, all artists paint for an audience and all artists paint for a market, and Maud Lewis should be entitled to do that as well without anyone casting nasturtiums, as they say, upon her. But so there she is, paintings for sale, Maud Lewis. But the legend of Maud really started to take off in the mid-60s, when two things happened. One, she had a visitor from a journalist from the Toronto Star who wrote a big feature about this little lady living in Marshalltown by the highway. And he took pictures and he interviewed her. And here she is beside her house, which of course she famously covered with paint all over the place. And I want to draw your attention, just as a little aside, to the painting that she has in her hands. Clearly this is the winter season. You can see there's a little bit of snow down below her, and she's showing a winter scene. The only thing about this winter scene is typically for Maud Lewis, it's winter in the foreground, but it seems to be late spring in the background. One of the things about Maud Lewis is she wasn't one to jeopardize a great opportunity for a picture, you know, by things like verisimilitude. You know, if the picture looked better to have spring in the background and winter in the foreground, then so be it, because that green, blue, and white look simply sensational together, and she appreciated that well. So this was the shoot from the Toronto Star. And then around the same time in the mid-60s, she was also the subject of a CBC television documentary that really brought people into her world. And this is a still from that film, with her chicken noodle soup can that she used for, you know, cleaning her paintbrushes at her little tiny house. You can see the light shining through the glass, which has been painted with flowers. You can also see very clearly the arthritis that began to afflict Maud Lewis very early in life, when she was just a child. She also had a congenital birth defect she was born with that meant her chin was impaired in its movements. So she really dealt with physical hardship all the way through her life. But it was really these media presentations of her in the mid-60s that made her more than a local phenomenon. But then, of course, in 2017, she becomes an international phenomenon with the film Maudie, which I'm presuming that many of you Maudophiles out there saw. Of course, Sally Hawkins in the role of Maud, and Ethan Hawke in the role of her husband, but I think a good deal more attractive than Everett, and also kindlier from what we can tell. She really bit off quite a big lot to chew in marrying him. But the story of their life has always been a fascination for people. I'm just going to rest here for a moment on Sally Hawkins' lovely face, because it's a story that is marked with incredible resilience as this person, this young girl, and then young woman, and then adult woman, kind of made her way through life and managed to make a life for herself despite the setbacks that she faced, both in terms of her health, in terms of the unkindnesses of her family, which were legion. She, for example, had a child sort of by surprise out of wedlock when she was 25, and her family told her that the child had died, while in fact the child was given to another family in a nearby village. She didn't find out about this until she was a woman of around 50 years of age. So she did have a daughter, Catherine, from whom she remained estranged. I think when Catherine showed up on her doorstep, when Maud Lewis was around, as I say, 50 years of age, she just simply said, "No, I had a son, he died in childbirth, you're no relation of mine." So, you know, she had a terrible brother who was both exploitative and heartless of her, you know, even the wicked aunt who was mean and repressive to her. And she was just not going to accept this in her life. And I think this is part of what really appeals to people so profoundly about the Maud Lewis story. She wasn't going to be put in a box by anyone. She had this extraordinary spirit. And she found a way, and rather famously answered an ad in the newspaper in Digby, where she was living by the time she was in her 30s with her aunt, an ad advertising for a housekeeper maid for this Everett Lewis, who was living out on the highway by himself. And he was known to be a bit of a sketchy character in the community, but she was undaunted and walked out there herself and knocked on his door and said, "You need a housekeeper, I need a job. You know, how about we get on with this?" And after he asked her, "Is whatever's wrong with you contagious?" I mean, he was rather a charmless figure, it must be said. She assured him it was not. And he took her on. And then shortly thereafter, she said, "Well, actually, if I'm going to be out here with you alone on the highway, I think you better marry me, because it's not quite proper." And so in the end of the day, what happened was, you know, very quickly, it became clear that she was the one. This is their little house that they lived in together, which is now in the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, which she painted inside and out. She very quickly started making the paintings. I'm going to go forward and then back again. She started making the early paintings for which she became, you know, quickly quite well known in the community. And his fish peddling, which had financed them up until that point, you know, was quickly overshot by her, but by the money that she could make selling art. So in the end of the day, I like to say it was really he who ended up being the housekeeper, and she who ended up being the breadwinner. So for this and other reasons, she's, in my eyes at least, a bit of a feminist heroine. But when we look back here, just to where we were, this little house, I mean, I think you can see the evidence here of the life that they made together, for all of its deep poverty. She died basically of malnutrition at the end of her life, which is extremely sad. But notwithstanding, there is just an enormous explosive creativity to this person. Everything in the house is covered with paint. If you were to pivot around in this little room, which you can walk into and look at the Archaeology of Nova Scotia, you would see, the wrought iron stove is also covered with paint. The stair risers are covered with paint. The glass panels of the window are painted for a stained glass effect. I mean, she just was absolutely relentless in making the world that she wanted. And that world that she created had a lot to do with the world she came into. She was a little girl born in Yarmouth, early childhood in a little town called South Ohio. And then the family quickly moved back into Yarmouth again, where her father had a harness making shop and a blacksmithery. And she spent quite a bit of happy time, I think, with her mother. She made Christmas cards and various winter scene cards with her mother. We have some of them still, and they're in the traveling show. But she also spent a lot of time around animals. I think it was quite clear early on that she wasn't going to fit in with the other kids at school. And I find this picture fascinating for a couple of reasons. First of all, we can see already here, she's very, very small, that this affliction, the arthritic condition, is starting to affect her wrist here. And this would be a problem throughout her life. I love the little gesture of concentration here with her tongue out as she's looking at something. I'm not quite sure what she's got her attention on, but mostly it's about the brow. It's about that look of determination that she has. And indeed, it would be that quality in her, that stubbornness, that would take her so far in life. And I think we also see in the foreground here, the soon-to-be immortalized Fluffy the cat, who she recalled in many spectacular works of art over the years. This was a motif that she at times repeated. But what you can see here is that she's taken the essentials. She's taken the markings from the head, but then obviously she's amped it up. Formally, she's reduced the scene to the bare minimum things that really matter the most. She's created this beautiful play between the tulips with these sort of lush brush strokes and this kind of confetti shower of what looked like cherry blossoms or goodness knows what up above. Then there's these ingenious device of these black sloping lines that kind of frame the cat and also echo the angle of the tail and pick up the dynamic with the ears, locking the whole thing into position. And then this marvelous expression that is, quite characteristic of a lot of her cat paintings. And I think, this is absolutely one of my favorite paintings by Maud Lewis. And I hate to confess, and I certainly don't want to offend any listeners out there, but I am the least cat-loving person practically, except for my sister Marjorie, that I know of. I am just not a cat person, but I absolutely love this painting. And I had the good fortune to walk past it all the time while it was hanging outside our offices while I would walk back and forth from my office. And it would almost always make me stop and look at it to puzzle over just why this thing was so madly appealing. And it has, as I say, it has all the ingredients of that. Her love of animals being among them, obviously. As I said, her father was a harness maker, and there was a blacksmith shop. She spent a lot of time there as a child. I think it was a place of solace for her because, as I said, she wasn't necessarily getting along with the other children at school, and I think she was quite isolated. And there she was around animals a lot. Again, the horses and the cows, the oxen that we'll see coming up later in her work. And this was, I think, largely where she spent a lot of her time until the death of her parents in her early 30s, which made her much more vulnerable because of her disabilities. And then, as I said, this movement to this rather nasty aunt in Digby and thence to down the highway to knock on the door of Everett Lewis. And as I said, once they get together and she starts painting, well, then everything in her life starts to change. And these are early pictures, and they're not often seen. They're really wonderfully rare. And there's a great preponderance of this wonderful pea soup color. I think that Everett, was sort of scrounging up leftover paint cans and trying to help her out in the early days because they were absolutely penniless. As the years went by, people who were buying her paintings helped her out a bit, and sometimes they would bring her art supplies. But in the beginning, this palette is very characteristic. But what we see already is, a lovely, ability to set the stage and create a scene. I love this rather frolicsome figure here in the left, who's getting ready to go for a dip, and the lovely effect of the reflection on the water here. Here, I am just loving this swoopy driveway up to the house and church that are in the background. And again, as with the sign, paintings for sale, the wonderful way she has with incorporating text into the composition of the work. And, when I look at this painting, and, call me crazy, and you may well, but I'm seeing Milton Avery here. I'm seeing a kind of way in which she's reducing the scene to its essential movements and rhythms, and, showing this extraordinary sense, like the American modern painter Avery had, of, how to, give a lot of feeling and movement and mood to a work through absolutely minimal means. And I find this, very impressive. Of course, needless to say, Maud Lewis had no formal training in art, and everything she managed to learn about putting pictures together, like, for example, color combinations, which we can see particularly gorgeous here on the right, those oranges and pinks and greens together. This is just all from the gut. So, to me, that's one of the other incredibly remarkable things about her. She moves from these early pictures into a brighter palette, as I say, and it's partly because she is able to buy new supplies. And also, I think probably her production, she's also understanding a little bit more what is popular with her clients. But one of the things we did with this show, we had to acknowledge, we're happy to acknowledge the repetition in Maud Lewis's work, because she does have certain subjects that she repeats and repeats and repeats, seemingly ad infinitum. But what we discovered when we started looking carefully at her work is that while she repeats a subject or even a composition, she will never really copy it exactly. It's very unusual for her to make an exact replica. It's often, very similar as this is, but it's spring or it's winter or it's fall, or there's water behind, or there isn't, or the flowers are this way, or they're that way, or there's no flowers at all, or the overhanging trees, meet or they don't meet, or there's no trees. When you get them all together, you get 20 or 30 oxen paintings together on the wall, as we did. You actually, instead of seeing sameness, what we ended up seeing was variation and ingenuity, and the fact that, quite obviously, Maud Lewis was pleasing herself and amusing herself every time she made a picture, which really goes to the authenticity and sincerity, I think, of her practice. The other thing about these paintings, which I love, the oxen pictures, is that I mentioned earlier that she hung around her father's blacksmith shop a lot when she was a child. And, she doesn't put a lot of detail into her paintings, but one of the most delightful details about all of the oxen pictures is the eyelashes. And anyone who knows anything about cows and oxen and their ilk knows that eyelashes are arguably their finest features. And she would have known that looking into their eyes as a little girl. And that is the salient detail that she brings forward in these paintings. And I think it's a lot of what gives them their distinctive personality, but also, their sense of lived experience and encounter with those wonderful beasts. She also, as I mentioned before, when we looked at that snow scene that has the green hills in the background, she also was very inventive and didn't feel constrained to stick with the facts. This painting has been given the title "Cows Grazing Among Flowering Spruce," which likely would not have been a title given by Maud Lewis. It's probably given by some observant curator in the intervening decades since this was painted. But of course, spruce trees do not burst into blossom as they do in this painting. They are resolutely evergreen. But, if in Maud Lewis world, you need a shower of cherry blossoms on that spruce tree, well, why not? So that's the other thing I love about her is her inventiveness and her ability to know that, that this picture compositionally needed that liveliness in the middle and distance part of the picture to really sing, and that there would be this delightful relationship between the close-up blossoms on the right-hand side of the picture and the distant trees, sort of talking to each other the movement of those cows kind of, you know, echoing the eye as it moves back and forth between the two. So lovely, lovely. Repetition and variation. Here we go again with the deer and her fawn, another favorite motif. There are dozens of these, a little bit less common than the oxen pulling, but no less infinite in their variety. And here we just have 2 of them. We have several more in the show. But, you know, sometimes in the winter, beside running water, beside still water, or in the fall, or with the sunset in the background, or, you know, in the spring. I mean, it's almost comical, the effect when you put an array of these pictures together on the wall. It's totally delightful. And you also see the kind of artistic shorthand of, you know, deer and fawn on the left-hand side there. The fawn's little body seems to kind of like disappear into thin air between the front legs of the mother deer, but not to worry, it works as a picture, and that's what counts to Maud Lewis. Of course, cats, cats, and more cats. These are probably the most numerous repeated works of hers, is this motif of the 3 cats. But, you know, when people talk about Maud Lewis's charm in her paintings comes from her subject matters, I beg to differ, because you can paint cats and have it just be as dull as ditch water. We've all seen bad cat paintings. When Maud Lewis paints cats, they are electrifying and amusing and startling and super funny. And we were, you know, we actually, I don't know, God, how many black cat tote bags we managed to put out the front door at McMichael. But, you know, the expression on these cats' faces is just simply priceless. And, you know, it's not the subject of a cat that makes this interesting. It's what kind of cat and how it's painted. And of course, the loveliness of the interplay between the flowers at ground level and the overarching blossoms above, and those silly, silly faces. I love them. Maud Lewis did all sorts of different kinds of assignments as well during her life. And we're very, very lucky in this show to have these wooden panel screens that were made for a client down in Nova Scotia. And I believe, I wish Alan Deacon was on the line with me, he could correct me. They were either $17 a piece or 17 cents a piece for this particular client. And she made a set for summer and a set for winter too. And she, you know, she never really, I should mention here that, you know, in the course of her lifetime, she really didn't charge more than about $5. I think she maybe inched up to $7 at one point during her lifetime for her paintings, but she felt, of course, she started out her career, you know, asking for almost nothing for them. She really felt it was greedy to ask for more. And she felt that she had such pleasure in making them that, you know, it would be really wrong to charge any more for her work. So, there, you know, it's one of those horrible ironies, because now, particularly since the Maud movie came out in 2017, you know, what used to sell 10 years ago for $8,000 is now selling for $17,000, $20,000, and even $40,000 in one instance. I was just looking at the market prices the other day again to remind myself. It really does seem that it was the movie coming out that triggered a steep escalation in the price of her work. But in her own life, she didn't realize that. But what she did realize, obviously, is the extreme pleasure in making these things. And here we have these little blue songbirds that we see also in her paintings for sale sign. We see these lovely firebirds. When you look at these, she's using silver paint on these wings. Someone must have given her a jar of silver paint, and she would have loved that because it would be so decorative. And she really went to town with that. But these are from the collection of John Risley, on loan to us from the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, who were very, very generous in letting us have these things for such a long time, because as we've mentioned, they are going off on a bit of a tour, and they're so beloved in Halifax. Anyway, they are being cherished. So again, our thanks. These Christmas shutters were the seasonal alternative, and you know, they're slightly, I mean, what I like about them actually is there's something almost sort of surrealistic and even slightly menacing or strange about these snowmen. But you know, they're not actually saccharine. They're really quite peculiar, and I love that about these. Also, who paints Christmas shutters on black, or indeed the summer shutters against black? What an interesting choice, to amp up the color even further, which as we can clearly see was, really what turned her on about painting was both composition and these glorious, glorious colors. And we see these colors nowhere more boldly than in her harbor scenes, which of course, I'm looking out now at the broiling concrete of Toronto as I'm speaking to you all. If some of you are in Nova Scotia, well then lucky you. We wish we were there. But her harbor scenes, they're both wonderful for the imagery, of course, but again, you can have a harbor scene that is as dull as can be. These are absolutely riveting, full of energy. You can see this incredible, just formal instincts with how these drying cod flakes are set out, this repeating rhythmic pattern of these triangular forms that seem to echo the birds up in the sky. Here again, the marvelous play between the red and the yellow, these sort of striations, going one way, the white bars going another, picking up on this little pot of the two greens back here, and the dipping and diving of the gulls. Very, very lively compositions, and just very, very well put together, both from the point of view of line and color. Here again, like wonderful, the play of the diagonals and the verticals here in this play, how these colors up in this house are picked up by these down here. The kind of beautiful, like this green, like how did she come up with that? How did she know? It would be much the worse if that green of that boat had been simply another blue or a yellow or another color from that composition. It's the very thing that painting needed. A fall scene, which is a little bit more unusual in her. And here we're looking out to the Digby Gut, which is a very famous piece of landscape in Nova Scotia, and the wider ocean beckons beyond. And you can see that the apples are falling from the tree. And again, this riot of this contrast between these oranges and yellows and the green and the blue, just wonderful. And I think about Maud Lewis, and I look at a painting like this, and it reminds me of Mendelssohn Joe, who's an Ontario folk artist who lives up in the woods north, sort of on the way up to North Bay, last time I checked. And he paints these very marvelously simplified images of in and around Algonquin Park and sort of the lower north part of Ontario, and he's really mastered the color palette so that you can, even though the pictures are fairly simply composed, you absolutely know where you are. And I feel, people who love Nova Scotia and know these scenes, I think they find in this color palette, a real sense of something that they recognize as home. It's as home as the smell of the trees and the smell of the salt air. It's very, very specific blues that she's using. Particularly here you see, and the play of the red and white against each other, like just very bold primary contrasts that just sing. And they have I think they have a lot of emotional impact simply because of that, just because of those vibrant contrasts. I mean, the brain likes color; it's stimulated by it, and so I've been sort of joking and saying, Maud Lewis is the sort of the Prozac of Canadian art, but really it's almost impossible to look at these pictures and not feel uplifted by them in mood. They're just wonderful. Towards the end now, looking at an early picture of hers that I particularly love. And this will be, going along on our tour. These beautiful, beautiful colors that she's using here, the way in which this is organized to radiate out, to kind of draw the whole composition together, the sprightliness of these two boughs that are kind of creating this wonderful bowing motion visually, the play of the reflections underneath. I mean, this is the fact that she was able to figure out how to do all this. And, these were quickly made paintings. They're made with absolute confidence and assuredness. I just marvel at her powers, and also, of course, at her life and her ability to make the life she wanted for herself, to stay there, making her art, living by her art, and living on her own terms, notwithstanding the fact that she was beset by the worst possible circumstances. And I think drawing always on the things in her life that made her happy. And I was being interviewed by CBC Radio in Halifax yesterday. We were talking about Maud Lewis, and they said, what do you really admire here? Why is she the woman of the hour for us? And I said, well, I think that, you know, Maud Lewis is a person who had all sorts of reasons to be unhappy, but somehow she managed to have the emotional discipline to train her attention on the things that would serve her well, which is her memories of the Nova Scotia, of her childhood, her love of animals, her memories of happy days. And she just simply stays connected to those things. And, you know, and I think in all of these paintings is kind of practicing gratitude for the experiences in her life that she's had that were meaningful to her, that were sustaining for her. And I really very much admire her ability to do that, as well as to make these beautiful paintings. So for me, she's sort of a heroine on both scores, I have to say. So that is a quick romp through Maud Lewis. Of course, the book has all the plates in it, should you want to order one from us at the McMichael. Here they are, Nova Scotia's very own odd couple. We have been so honored to have this chance to burnish her legacy and to share her work with people outside of Nova Scotia who don't know her work as well as they should. And thank you all so much for your kind attention. And I'm going to turn you over now for a real treat. Sarah Slean, who is a new friend to the McMichael. Sarah became a friend of ours because she wrote the most beautiful tweet about her visit to the McMichael when she came to see our Group of Seven show a couple of months ago, several now, before the COVID closures. And she wrote this lovely thing online. And so we ended up liking it so much that we kind of sought her out and asked her if she wouldn't mind writing for our Group of Seven book, which is going to be published later this fall, about our collection. And she happily agreed, and she ended up writing the most exquisite essay about Carmichael's Autumn Gold, which is one of our favorite pictures in our collection. And now that we have her in our sweaty embrace, we're not about to let her go. So anyway, she has recorded some beautiful songs for us from her forthcoming musical Maudie, which is going to premiere in Calgary. She's going to tell you a little bit about that. This woman is a 3-time Juno nominee. She has released 11 albums. It doesn't look possible when you see how lovely and young she is. She sings like an angel. It should also be noted that she paints, she writes poetry, and of course composes music. She's a superstar. So thank you all so much for being with us. And we're just going to do a little jiggle here while we get her up online. But thank you again so much. And I'll be back to answer questions after Sarah's done. Thanks so much. Bye.
Hello, I'm Sarah Slean. I'm a musician, songwriter, and composer. I'm delighted to be here with you today celebrating the magnificent Maud Lewis. I'm going to play you some songs from the show we are creating, myself, Solo Productions, which is Mary Young Leckie, and the book writer Kent Staines. We are making a stage musical adaptation of the beautiful film, I don't know if you saw it, Maudie, with Ethan Hawke and Sally Hawkins. And so we are really plumbing that film, but also Maud's artwork, of course, all the historical data we can find from her life. We've gone to Halifax to speak with all of the amazing people at the art gallery there. I've even walked inside a replica of her little house, which was absolutely amazing to experience. It was so small. It was so incredibly small. And she's just an absolutely inspirational figure. The music gushes out of me when I look at her work and think about her tremendous spirit, her fortitude, her determination to find beauty everywhere. So it's been such a pleasure working on this musical. We are hoping to premiere it next year with Theatre Calgary and the amazing director Stafford Arima. So keep your eye out for that, and I will have all kinds of information on my website as it becomes available. So thank you, and thank you, Sarah Milroy, and I hope you enjoyed the walkthrough. Here's some music. I'm going to play a song called Bloom. I wrote this song for the moment when Maud, in the film, when Maud is in Ida's house, and she's realizing that She's either going to stay there in this constrained, sort of dead place, and she will live out the rest of her days mostly in the same manner, with no autonomy, no agency, and no artistic freedom. Or she can take a huge chance and be courageous and strike out on her own on the hero's journey. And it's a really important moment in the film, and I think it's a really important moment in any artist's life, really. And Maud chooses to go on the journey, to plunge into the unknown. And you have to admire that kind of courage for a woman in her position in that time. It was really bold. And so the lyric in the song is, "That's what all the flowers know. The bud could never stay closed. It has to break through. It must bloom." And I think Maud realizes at this moment that she too must bloom. So here it is. I can't breathe in here, though the windows are open and the trees are all swaying with breeze. I am starving here, though the teacup is full up and there's plenty to eat as I please. Is this the house where I'm going to die, never knowing the sweetness of being alive? Why, Maud, why can't you learn to crochet, bake apple pies and call it a day? Forget all the pictures that clutter your heart, the dance hall adventures, the wonder, the art. There's a life I'm meant to live, and I know this isn't it. What would I give to finally live and breathe in a life that is mine? Trying to get by in black and white when I'm bursting with color inside. Change in the air, I can feel it. Oh, give me the strength to reveal it. Space of my own, a place to call home. Paintings, a desk and a chair. Someone to love and take care of, and curtains that dance on the air. These are the treasures I long for. They are simple, they are small, and to find them I'm gonna run, gonna walk, gonna crawl. It may not be the right road, but it will be my road. Don't know where I'm going, but I'm going. It's true. That's what all the flowers know. The bud could never stay closed. It has to break through. It must bloom. Dirty my skirts and laugh till it hurts. Look people straight in the eyes. Sing out that song I've held for too long. Let it blow like sheets on the line. I've got my own kind of music. It ain't fancy, it ain't fine. It's a gift and I'm longing to use it. And it's mine. It may not be the right road, but it will be my road. 'Cause there's more to life than what's inside this little room. That's what all the flowers know. The song called The Whole World in a Frame, and this is the first song I wrote for the musical. I'd watched the film a bunch of times, and I was trying to get at the essence of her. And I looked through all the archival footage and at all of her, of course, magnificent paintings. And there's a moment in the film which I felt really captured her spirit. And she's at Sandra's house, and it's her neighbor. And it's after a particularly awful episode with her husband, Everett, and she runs to her neighbors for some shelter. But in the middle of this sad moment, she's sitting at the table with her friend and turns her face towards the window, and she says, "I love a window. It's the whole of life already framed." And to me, that is really the spirit of this woman. She, her eyes were, or her spirit really, were this lens or this aperture where she would constantly be scanning the world for beauty, really, which is an admirable way to live. So I wrote this song called The Whole World in a Frame, and this is the song that convinced the producers that I could write the music for this musical.
Wow. Who has shivers?
I do.
I do. I don't know about you, Lisa, but I figure if it's still COVID times, I'm driving to Calgary for that opening.
I know, I've got to see it.
Got to do a road trip.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is just wonderful, and I can certainly see why, Sarah, you've been entrusted with the legacy to make a musical from the film. It's just wonderfully, wonderfully sensitive music. And we're so delighted to have the sneak peek here through the McMichael. So thank you for that great privilege. Very, very generous.
So we have time for a few questions, it turns out, and I have some.
Yes.
Yes, the most burning question that seems to be, or comment that people are making,
Yes.
is that that people think that the house that is in the Art Gallery Nova Scotia is original and not a replica.
It is
Can you comment?
definitely original. And it was, yes, and this is all hail to the AGNS, because it was falling apart about the time that Everett died shortly, not that long after Maud did. And she died in 1970 and he died closely afterwards. And it was sort of rotting away by the highway, and a bunch of very concerned citizens in that community kind of fought to protect it and to preserve it from being vandalized and so on. And eventually it was Bernie Reardon at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia who kind of led the brigades to really fight to raise the money to have it dismantled, to have it painstakingly restored. By then it had been out in the elements for decades, and bring it and have it reconstituted in all its glory at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. So when you go to the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, which I highly recommend that you do, you will see the actual real thing. And it's, you know, it's very weather beaten. It is astonishingly small, as Sarah mentioned, but it is in fact the real thing. And I can see why Sarah thought it must be a replica, because, you know, who would think that we would be lucky enough to have the real thing, but indeed we do. Yes, we actually tried to convince the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia to let us bring it to McMichael, but it's just a bit too fragile. But they're developing a virtual reality version of it with some people in Halifax. So there will someday be a way to, in VR, walk into the little house and look all around and look at all the teapots and, you know, wonderful painted stove and the stair risers and all of that stuff. And that'll be a great day.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, virtual reality makes me completely woozy, but other people will enjoy it a lot.
So another question I've got a couple of people ask is about her signature, because sometimes it says Lewis, other times it's M. Lewis or Maud Lewis. And can you comment on that?
It does seem to go through again, our friend Alan Deacon would be able to answer that better. But from what I can see, I mean, her signature certainly gets a bit blunter and larger in scale as the years go by, because her ability to have fine motor skills, you know, deteriorates as her arthritis gets worse and worse. And I mean, you know, we don't really ever have any record of her, by the way, complaining about pain, which is, you know, typical of her. But, you know, it was so disabling that she could basically only, you know, hold the paintbrush by sort of jamming it through her fingers. But it became harder and harder for her to make fine strokes as she got older, as she was more inclined to do in her early years. But M. Lewis, Maud Lewis, it seemed to me that there wasn't a particular pattern to that, but maybe Alan can write into us and correct me if I'm wrong, and you can keep an eye out for his intel on that. He would know.
Okay. Now I'll ask you a large, serious question. Are you ready?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm ready for myself.
Okay, so how do you hope this exhibition contributes to public and scholarly understanding of Maud Lewis? And how does it build or expand or, you know, reflect or acknowledge past large-scale exhibitions? Because there was a touring exhibition in the 1990s.
That's right. And it was a glorious one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I mean, Maud Lewis's wonderful life story is both a blessing and a curse, because it really makes, I mean, people love her life story. Of course, it's so incredibly compelling. It's an up from under narrative, you know, all the things we've talked about today. But it has also meant, I felt, that there was a tendency to not really look carefully at her as an artist and assess her work on aesthetic terms, and to really take a careful look at how she puts pictures together, and, you know, how she plays with form and color, and the incredible, there was a tendency to kind of underplay the repetitiveness in her work, as if that undermined the authenticity of her production. What we did at McMichael was go the other way completely, and, you know, really foreground the repetitiveness in terms of subject matter in her work, in order to be able to reveal the incredible inventiveness and variety in the many different iterations of these themes that she did. So I do believe that our show is really groundbreaking, in that it really focuses on her as an artist. It gives the life story, of course. One would be foolish to hold that back, but it really, you know, turns people's attention to the objects and to people looking at how she made the paintings. And the proof really was in the pudding. I mean, we would go through the show and we would find people either with, you know, women with each other, or a husband and wife arguing about like whose interpretation was, whose view of it was right, or mothers and daughters, you know, mothers with their children, whatever. But people would form groups and they would be looking carefully at how the pictures were different and how they were made. And it was really careful looking going on. And that made me feel, okay, you know, we've accomplished something here, because people are actually looking at her as an artist, not just as a folk hero. And that was important to us.
Mm-hmm. Got a practical question about process.
Yes.
So did she paint? She painted in oils, did she? With these, it was, yeah. And what did she paint on? She
painted on panels of wood or sometimes linoleum. And so if you have what you believe to be a Maud Lewis and it's a canvas, you're probably sadly out of luck. There has been a bit of a flurry of fakes out there, but you know, that was not her bag, baby. She was working on the cheapest possible materials. Yeah. And they were durable and she could store them easily. And Everett would prepare these wood shakes for her, and usually in pretty standard sizes. Sometimes she worked larger. We had John Risley has a number of larger format works in his collection that he was kind enough to lend to us, but they are really the outliers. Usually the works are you know, stick it under your arm and get back in the car size.
Oh, yeah. Yes, because a couple of people commented that Everett, of course, might have been, there's some sense that he might have faked some of them after her death.
Well, you know, I wouldn't put it past him in the least. We also have a number of, I have a sort of secret, you know, fascination with Everett, because one of the things that happened in the course of the Maud Lewis research is, and I wish I had an example to show you, but there are some paintings that we know were by Everett. And one of our donors to the show, Brian Rice, showed me a spectacular painting by Everett of, I think it was of dogs that he has. And it was, you know, quite distinct from Maud Lewis's. It had a much more kind of frenzied, you know, feeling to it. It was a whole different kind of art making, but electrifying as well. So he was, poor old Everett, you know, not without his gifts. But sadly, not the superstar that his wife was to become.
I'll ask you.
He did peddle a mean fish.
Oh, yes. In the days my grandmother would say, when the guy came around with smoked fish, would come around to her door in Pictou. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing, is that, I mean, unfortunately, fate came around to bite poor old Everett in the ass, because he used to always tell everyone how much money he was making off his wife's painting, and he would take the money and put it in glass jars and bury it in the garden, he told everyone. Yeah. Well, after Maud died, someone came along, and unfortunately, Everett met a sticky end, because someone killed him, I guess, looking for the money that he'd been bragging about down the pub.
Oh boy.
And that was it for him. So, you know, one way to learn to keep your mouth shut. Anyway.
On that cheery note.
Poor old Everett. But anyway, he did have his moment of, a few moments of aesthetic triumph along the way.
All right, so the last question I have for you is just, people have been asking, is it coming back to the McMichael, or where is it going to be? So when is it at the Glenbow?
All right, it's going to be, I'm all ready here, I've got my list.
Marvelous.
It's going to be in Thunder Bay, October 12 to January 3, 2021. Then it's going to be at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, January 16, 2021 to May 2nd, 2021. Then it's going to be at the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, May 15 to August 29, 2021. Thitherwards to the Art Gallery of Hamilton, so coming back closer to home, September 11, 2021 to January 8, 2022. There may be a couple of additional Western spots on our circuit at that point. And then finally, so needless to say, you know, rush down to your local museum and demand that they bring Maud Lewis, please. We would be delighted to send it to your museum in your community. And then lastly, back home to the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, where it will have its homecoming celebration. And it may even turn out, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, I think, is planning a large building project. They're going to be, I think, closing briefly and then reopening again. It could even be that this show is either their closing show, as they say farewell to their public for a brief spell, or maybe even their opening show if the tour gets expanded. So anyway, we'll be thrilled to send it back to Nova Scotia and to have it back back home again.
Oh,
they will have seen some miles. Yeah.
And how wonderful that people across the country are going to get a chance to see this work.
Well, it's great, and boy, do we ever need it right now. It's just what the doctor ordered. So
yes, absolutely. So I think that's where our hour is up, and that's about all we have time for. But just to let people know, if you would like to buy the catalog or any other merchandise, you can visit the online gift shop, and we got a little cute little picture here for you of things that we still have. There are still items there.
I have to say the stuffed black cat. I mean, really, do not underestimate that object.
Yeah, I bought at least 5. I think I've bought at least 5 of those. Everybody needed to have one. And a final reminder that if you would like to donate to support this and future presentations, on your screen you will see there's a QR code. You just hold your camera up to it and it will pop up a little website, or you could text, or you can you can use that link there, or else you can visit our website. And I want to say thank you so much for attending the presentation this afternoon, and we hope to see you at future ones.
See you all soon.
See you all. Take care, everybody.